Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on venture client modeling. My name is Ruslan, I'm Gemba 13, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's session, which is brought to you by INSEAD Alumni Global Tech Club. Just a few words about myself. I have close to 20 years of experience across different industries and geographies as the usual INSEADer. And my main areas of interests are innovation and digital transformation together with a strategy, corporate strategy. And therefore, I found these topics of venture client model quite an exciting one, as I have dealt with it myself. And the topic itself, the venture client modeling, is about, let's say, it's a game changer and a new approach to corporate innovation and startup collaboration. And we are here today to unpack its full potential and to learn about benefits and also the challenges of this approach with our two outstanding speakers, which I introduce in a moment. And so let me tell you more about how this session will look like for the next hour. First, we will have an introduction by Gregor. Gregor is a partner at Deloitte and also a CEO of 27 Pilots. 27 Pilots is a pioneer company who has pioneered the concept and has implemented it in several industries, of which Gregor will go more into detail. And he will also explain and present us how the venture client modeling works, the fundamental aspects of it, and of course, how different industries could implement it in their corporations or different corporations for different industries. And then we will jump into a second part and see the real world example on presented by Ben, and who is startup partner at Holcim. For those who don't know, Holcim is one of the largest sustainable materials and solution provider worldwide. And Bengt will go maybe a little bit more into presenting how Holcim faced the challenges and what solutions did they come up with and what ultimately were the benefits from this specific model. We will summarize and wrap up this presentation part with a few key takeaways and actionable items for those who would like to implement it in their own corporations and find the collaboration with startups as a topic they're interested in. And then we will jump into the Q&A session, which is, thanks to you, we have gotten already over 30 questions. We will try to go through them all, but considering the time, we might not be able to. So I have structured them in such a way to provide, to take the most out of this session. And last but not least, please feel free to submit your question during the presentations. We will definitely take those with us, and we will see if we can incorporate them in our future webinars, which we plan to do on this and other innovation and digital transformation topics in the future. And without further ado, I would like to invite Gregor to present the first part of the presentation, which is about understanding the venture client model better.
Thanks, Ruslan, and thanks for organizing this event, and thanks for inviting us. I have done my first, actually the first case written about the venture client model was written by some INSEAD professors in 2018. And that case actually is taught continuously, not only at INSEAD, but really across the world in many business schools. So if you're interested in the topic, I recommend you look into the case library of INSEAD, Google by BMW, INSEAD, venture client model, BMW Startup Garage, you'll find the case. So today in the next 10 minutes, I will give you a quick introduction overview over the venture client model, which, as Ruslan said, is from my experience over the last 10 years, really a breakthrough in corporate venturing, in that it allows you to benefit from significantly more startups, better startups, with less risk and cost than previous corporate venturing models. Now, a quick intro about 27 Pilots. So 27 Pilots is a company I founded in 2018 out of BMW. We focus on helping companies gain competitive advantage from top startups with our market-leading venture client solutions. So that's consulting, but also technology to set up and run and manage corporate venture client units. Here, brief history about venture clienting. So in 2014, when I was working at BMW, I coined the term venture client when I was working at BMW in innovation strategy. And I subsequently developed also the venture client model at BMW as an alternative to existing corporate venturing models, which, to my understanding, and did not fit the needs of a BMW in regards to benefiting strategically from startups. Out of the venture client model in 2015, the first corporate venture client unit was born, known as the BMW Startup Garage. And that's a dedicated unit to run, execute venture client activities to enable all BMW to benefit from startups. This was quite successful within BMW. The model worked nicely, generated a significant improvement in the way BMW could benefit from startups. And here in 2018, I decided to create a company, to spin out a company, 27 Pilots, to help other companies implement and be really excellent in venture clienting. And some of those clients you see here on the right, BMW is a client, but also Airbus, Bosch, and actually one of our very first clients back in 2018 was a company that will present the case today, which is Holcim, which we have here today, which is great. And in 2023, Deloitte acquired 27 Pilots. One of the goals was to bring venture clienting to all countries, leveraging the infrastructure, the global infrastructure that Deloitte has. Now let's jump into the venture client model. So the start of, or really what ignited my thoughts about creating a new venturing tool was really that this in a way this picture, which I think many corporates and especially corporate CEOs do not have in their minds. Startups are extremely relevant. If you look back at the last 30, 40 years, just about any breakthrough innovation has emerged in the startup ecosystem, whether it's 10, 20, or 30 years back. If you look at an Intel, if you look at a Salesforce, if you look at a Apple even, correct, those are all companies that were born in the startup ecosystem, meaning they were born as venture-backed, as venture capital-backed entrepreneurial companies. And I think one of the most talked about startups that is again introducing a strong new technology into the market is OpenAI with generative AI, a product that I'm sure all of you have used. So this is really the basics of why a venture client model is needed, because a venture client unit is a tool that helps you benefit from startups, and you would only use that tool if startups are relevant for you. And as we can see here, startups have cutting edge technologies. So venture clienting really becomes an important tool to leverage those resources. Now, the question is obviously, if there are many, many startups out there from which a corporate can benefit, the question is, how can I benefit measurably from the startups? And not just one department, not just R&D, but really the entire corporation, because maybe there's technology for the IT department and cybersecurity, maybe there's technology for logistics, manufacturing, maybe there's technology for clean energy, whatever the topic is. And you should really have a way of benefiting from all kinds of startups across the entire value chain. And also, they have to be top startups. If they're not, startup is not good, a corporate won't make a startup any better, right? So it really needs to be a tool that works for many and works for really, really good startups. Now, back in the 90s, management already had recognized that, Silicon Valley or startups have powerful, interesting new technologies, and we should find ways of engaging and leveraging those technologies. So corporate venture capital was invented. Corporate venture capital today is known as the corporate venturing tool. And really the objective behind corporate venture capital is to allow companies gain competitive advantage from startups by making a, let's say, non-controlling minority venture capital-like investment, or known as corporate venture capital investment. So that started in the 90s, and I think as of today, there are about 1,000 companies that have one or another form of corporate venture capital units across the world. Now, this didn't really work, right? What we are seeing is that CVCs hardly deliver on their strategic mandate. There's an interesting statistic from CB Insight saying that just about 10% of portfolio companies that are invested by CVCs enter in some kind of strategic partnership. That means that you're putting money and resources into a tool that only really leverages the strategic advantages of startups, just out of 10% of the startups you engage with, right? Now, why is that the case? Or let's say consequences. CVC units have a very short lifespan, on average just about 3.8 years. And in the recent, or let's say last 12, 18 months, we are again seeing many CVCs units closing because CEOs do not see the strategic benefit emerging out of those vehicles. Now, why is that? Now, if you look at the corporate venture capital model, it kind of looks like this, right? So there's a startup, here to the left, that has a cutting edge innovation, right? Now, what you do, you have a corporate venture capital unit that has an expensive office in Silicon Valley most of the time, or in some other expensive city, and they do an equity transfer, right? They buy a non-controlling minority stake. This is attached to a financial goal, which is either make money, or generally the financial goal is not to lose money, right? After that comes the important transaction, which is the innovation transfer. Make sure that this innovation ends up in the company so it can generate a benefit, right? A better chemistry for a battery so the battery charges faster, right? A better sensor in your manufacturing so your manufacturing can be more efficient, right? That would be the strategic goal. Now, what's happening is that this part of the process takes so much money and so much attention that this part of the process really suffers, and it's not really happening too often. In numbers, what we can see is that, for example, if you take a $200 million fund, over a span of 10 years, it enables on average 3 to 5 partnerships over 10 years. And that costs in capital costs at about 5 million per startup, right? This doesn't make much sense. I think those are in essence, the numbers that CEOs look at when they think about their vehicle, corporate venture capital, to obtain strategic benefits from startups. And now, what I did back then at BMW, I thought, well, we can try to improve corporate venture capital, right? We can try to improve this team here. And really, most of the papers and academic teaching is about improving this part here. But my hypothesis is, even if you hire the very best venture capital team, if you hire Mark Andreessen himself to run, or the guys from Sequoia, this unit here, it won't be any better, because you still have this two-step approach where the first step is very expensive and the second step is not really paid much attention to. So let's rethink corporate venturing. That's what I thought back at BMW in 2014. Now, it sounds a little bit obvious today, but it wasn't back then. What I said, well, let's just get rid of the capital part of this transaction. Well, let's just cut out the middleman. And by cutting out the middleman, we immediately position ourselves as a client, because we don't approach the startup any longer with, oh, allow me to invest and then I will buy your product or use your product. You basically approach the startup and say, I want to use your product. I want to be your client right away. Now, by saving the process and the capital cost, now you can put the money really into the innovation transfer. And you're also improving your positioning in the market in front of the startup, because a startup always wants to talk and always wants to engage with potential clients. And obviously, many startups also want to engage with the investor, but the very, very good startups generally have enough investors, right? So, but all startups have one thing in common, which is clients, because that's the ultimate metric of their success. So that's the basic idea behind venture clienting. Now, companies purchasing startup solutions directly without a previous investment is nothing new. All right, many companies have done this for decades, but it didn't really work either. You know, for example, BMW, without investing in startups, has worked with companies like Google or Mobileye, you know, as long as 20 years ago. But to establish those relationships was really cumbersome, was really difficult. So what I did is I said, well, we need to focus on being a client, but we need to be a good client. And in order to improve anything you want to do in a corporate setting, what you do, you create a dedicated, you know, model. You create processes. You create resources that are specialized on executing a certain capability. That's when the venture client unit idea was born. As a dedicated team within BMW that would only do venture client activities, so that other departments within BMW could engage with startups through a partnership or an M&A transaction. And also through some kind of minority investments after the venture client activity has proven that the startup is really worth, and its technology is really cutting edge. Now, this approach, you know, adopting a venture client unit was a new thing back in 2015. But today there are dozens of corporations who have implemented venture client units, not only Siemens, BMW, but as you can see here, many more companies. And at this point, we know companies as far away as Chile who are using or applying the venture client model. And it also made its way into the world of academia. Right? I said at the beginning, INSEAD and many other business schools are teaching, studying, and researching the venture client model in order to improve it. Now, there are obviously many possibilities of structuring your venture client unit. There are many possibilities of creating a venture client model, and we have seen venture client models that are really bad. A bad venture client model won't do any good, right? It's kind of like saying sports is important, yes, but only if you, and it will make you healthy, yes, but only if you do sports correctly, right? Same with venture clienting. Now, this is a model that emerges out of BMW and that was refined by 27 pilots, applying this model to multiple corporations over the last years. And it basically consists of three basic elements here in the middle that drive the value from startups, which is a module around startup intelligence, which is learning about startups, researching startups, but also researching what are the strategic challenges within the corporate for which startups could have unique solutions. This module here is around piloting, is around validating, and obviously the art of piloting in venture clienting is very important. It's not a pilot in a lab. It's not a pilot, you know, at a lab somewhere in Silicon Valley or in Israel. It's really a pilot at within the company with applied to a real use case with a real problem owners. And then there is the startup adoption, which is ultimately some kind of licensing, an M&A transaction, a partial M&A, or any kind of other kind of activities that you conduct in order to expand and deploy the technology corporate-wide. And this is supported by, obviously, this main value driver in the venture client model needs to be supported by secondary, by enabling activities around venture client strategy, structure. You also need to work on the culture inside a company so that people understand and embrace the value of startups. And you also need technology and data to run this venture client process because if you don't have that, it won't work. So that, in essence, is you know, a very, you know, highly summarized version of the venture client model. Happy to go more into detail in in other sessions, or if you want to follow up with me after that session. Here's just one case, and I will share the link. This is a video on YouTube that shows a case of venture clienting at BMW, where BMW is using two startups, one out of Switzerland, one out of Seoul, to automize something in their factories, which is driving cars with driverless out of the factory, and this innovation helps BMW save hundreds of millions per year. And so much my part. I think Bengt will now dive deeper into a specific case of how you guys apply venture clienting.
Yeah, thank you, Gregor, for this comprehensive introduction into venture client modeling. It's just really fascinating to see how the approach actually benefits both the startups, potentially benefits if everything is implemented properly, both the startups and the corporates. And now we will hear how this model actually works in practice. And our next speaker is Bengt. Bengt is a startup partner at Holcim, and he will present us how they implemented the model at Holcim, what challenges they faced, and what the ultimate outcomes did they get. Bengt, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ruslan, and welcome everybody. Thanks, Gregor, also for the interesting intro. So happy to share about the experience here at Holcim, where we have implemented this venture clienting concept starting 6 years ago. So we have established exactly such a venture client unit, which Gregor just described. And maybe just as a little bit background about Holcim. I mean, just for everybody listening, we are a construction material company, right? So we are extremely strong in concrete and cement. So a question that when we started 6 years ago often has been brought up: what are you doing? You're in construction business. Why do you care about innovation, and why do you care about startups, right? So this was often something that we have heard. And maybe just to start to set the scene a little bit, to give you some sort of context about the opportunity of construction. I mean, first of all, it is a huge market. Concrete is the second most used material in the world, and there is still a lot that has to be built in the next years. So the number here, 60% of the world's built environment has not been built yet. This is relating to 2050, meaning that in the next 25 years, we will have to build as much as human mankind has built over the last 100 of years. But together with this big market potential comes also big challenges. On one side, productivity in construction is very low. So it's actually productivity index in construction has decreased over the last 30 years compared to all other industries, right? We heard before examples from automotive, where obviously productivity has accelerated a lot. So this is one of the big challenges. And the second big challenge, many of you will be aware, is kind of about the CO2 footprint of construction. So it is also one of the big emitters of CO2. So it's all about driving sustainability and driving productivity. So in the kind of output has to grow while the input has to decline. So when we started 6 years ago, we exactly thought about, okay, how can we now leverage technology and leverage startups to accelerate innovation and to solve these challenges that we have. And we looked into what are other corporates doing, what have we been doing so far, and also what is the possibility for a large corporate like Holcim to digest in terms of innovation. So what we found out, or what the feedback was from our management, well, you better show impact fast. We don't have a lot of time, right? And we don't have a lot of patience with these startup things. And it is better cheap. We don't want to invest millions into these things. So we looked at what are the opportunities out there on how to work with startups. And we looked at also our own experiences with accelerator programs. And we thought a little bit accelerator programs, or what we also sometimes call startup safaris, that's like watching soccer, right, on the TV. You are somehow the observer from the outside. It's fun. Then after the game, you go back home and you have maybe another beer, but you're not interacting somehow. So this was somehow a no-go for us. On the other side, Gregor already mentioned CVC. First of all, we said it's probably too costly for us. We don't have these millions that we want to invest into kind of these startup innovations. And also it is like a little bit like buying the soccer ball and putting it behind us somewhere on the shelf and say, oh, it's cool, right? I mean, we have this fancy technology, but actually we are not using it. So for us, it was clear we want to be on the field. We want to actually take innovation in our hands, take these new solutions and test it in our field. And that was kind of what we found venture clienting would be the right thing for us. So to create impact at speed, at scale, and ideally at lowest cost. This was 6 years ago, and I'm sharing now with you a little bit some KPIs, some figures of where this got us in the last 6 years. And looking here at different indicators on how we are measuring the adoption of this process, of this innovation process, and how we are measuring kind of the impact in the organization. And if we start on the left side, kind of the first indicator that we are looking at is how many startups that we actually assess. And why is that important? I mean, this is what Gregor mentioned before a little bit, this big insights that we are getting into an innovation funnel about trends which are happening in a certain innovation field, in a funnel, and a lot of interactions between our business people already, the Holcim business experts, the Holcim experts also in the countries with startups. And this is a big learning and insight generation thing. And we have, you see here, on average, we are having probably once per week a startup demo with our Holcim people. So these can be people from an R&D, from a country operation. This can be a logistics manager. And this is a lot of learning that already just this first phase of a pilot project or first phase of a startup collaboration can deliver. Second thing is then kind of how many pilots are we conducting? We say here more than 100 pilots over the last 6 years. So in average, we are currently trending at something like 20 pilots per year. This means every month we are kicking off 1 to 2 pilot projects. This is a massive innovation funnel that you're having and that you're generating for a company like ours. And secondly, it's relatively cheap. The number that you see here, like 15,000 euro per pilot project, this is about the average of the last 5-6 years that we have been doing these projects. So it's really at scale and at lowest cost. And then we would like to have a transformative approach where the whole organization can benefit from. So the third indicator that we look at is how many of our business units are taking advantage of such technology or of such an approach. How many of the business units come to us as a venture client unit and ask us for our support to find the right startup, to find the leading startup for their problem. And this is bottom up from the countries, but it is also top down corporate functions which are approaching us there. And in these 6 years, we have been working with startups from the Philippines to Brazil to Canada to South Africa, really across the entire footprint. So innovation and startups, they don't just happen in Silicon Valley or in Tel Aviv and in Berlin, but really you can find very interesting leading startups in all geographies. And lastly, it's then about kind of creating the impact in the business, and the impact you only generate if you also really adopt and use the technologies. So this is where we are trending maybe at 25% of the successful pilots being adopted. I think this is something where we continuously have to work on. I would say probably that's a number where I'm not fully satisfied, but important is that this is really where you generate the impact on your P&L then in the end. Now, what have been the areas where we have been driving innovation with these startups? It's really across the entire value chain. So we have done things on for example, on the logistics side with the procurement teams on freight tendering to purchase our logistics, our trucking capacity. We have been working on automation of back office processes of our shared data centers. We have been working also with HR on recruitment platforms and so on. So this is to show you a little bit that there is a lot which is actually also back office where you potentially would expect that startup innovation is not where you are targeting these things. But then also kind of on the customer relating side, on supporting our commercial teams with lead generation or tools which are used by our end customers like architects and engineers on how they design the future in construction. And the last example, just to show you, is obviously then also in the end of material innovation. I mean, we are a producer of construction material, and this can be one of the innovation fields, but it is only one of the fields, and there are many other areas where startups have been able to help us in the past. I just want to show you here a little bit how such a partnership also can evolve and evolved in our case, because as I said, it's in the end all about adoption. So this was here now one partnership with Neustark, where we started in 2021 with a pilot project in Switzerland. This was the Swiss team was very excited about it. They have started to scale it up in Switzerland. They helped to create more noise also on corporate level, so that in the end, the group decided to also make an equity investment into such a startup. So this is now a combination from moving from venture clienting to also potentially doing corporate venture capital. And I think this is not a must at all. This is one of the avenues that you potentially could go. But more important is that since then we have been rolling out such a technology in our businesses really across Europe. So just to show that these are not things which start somewhere on PowerPoint and end somewhere in a lab. This is stuff that starts in the field and ends really on the P&L of our business. Now, closing maybe with a little bit some experiences and challenges of such a venture clienting approach. And I would say it's a journey, and it continues to be a journey. I like to use here my friends from the Pokemon side to show a little bit how this is evolving. So at the beginning, and this is really kind of the first couple of months, maybe the first year to get started, it's all about kind of creating the understanding, the acceptance, the awareness in the organization about this approach, and making sure that the process is implemented. This means a lot of onboarding of stakeholders in legal, in procurement, in IT. These are the typical gatekeepers that you need to bring on board early on. And then kind of to start with the first projects. So you need to find also a business partner who is willing and eager to somehow solve one of their pain points with a startup solution. So getting kind of these first pilot projects into the pipeline. Before you come then to the next level, where it is all about scaling up the venture client unit that you have and positioning the venture client unit. So it's about creating really a solid alliance of the willing, as we called it. You will not convince everybody from the beginning, but you need to have somehow a constant internal customer base, which brings you kind of project flows, which bring you fresh pain points that have to be, or that can be addressed with startups. And therefore you have to position the venture client unit internally and also externally to the startup ecosystem. And we decided there to do this positioning also with a dedicated brand. So that's why we came up with Holcim Maker. So this is the platform which is known internally as the startup gateway for Holcim colleagues, and it is known externally in the construction ecosystem as the open innovation platform of Holcim. And also very important then in this kind of second and third year is you will start to discover that it's not done with the pilot. It's not done with kind of this first 3 to 6 months testing of the solution, but you really early on, you need to focus on this adoption piece. You need to make sure that you have the right stakeholder in the pilot project that will take this from just a pure pilot in a country to a scale up across a country, a scale up across a region, or maybe a whole group. So adoption becoming important and being one of the key challenges. And then, and this is kind of now maybe the second phase of our learning. So we are year 4, we are year 5, we are closing it now exactly now in December, year 6 of our venture clienting journey. I thought at the beginning, when you have convinced everybody, and you will have convinced everybody after 3 years, was my idea, that it is kind of just ongoing. Everybody understands it in the organization, and this is kind of the new normal. It's not. It's somehow a continued push and kind of, again, teaching maybe new leaders in the organization, reminding them of the approach, making sure you safeguard the wins that you have on the process and on the projects, because it is like an implant in an organization, and there is a lot of rejection of many of the things, right? I mean, you're always arguing together with and against potentially your own R&D teams, together and against your own IT teams to say, we can develop that ourselves, we should do it like this. And I'm constantly then the ambassador and say, hey, why don't we just check first what is out there on the market? What can leading startups help us in these cases? And this is probably kind of the continued battle that we are fighting here, and where we are constantly pushing Holcim forward in that respect. So that was a little bit about our exciting 6 years that we had, and we are looking forward to continue to disrupt internally and kind of the whole construction industry with this approach.
Thank you, Bengt. Thank you for sharing such a rich practical experience with venture client model at Holcim. It's inspiring to see how an industry such a heavy construction industry such as Holcim can be so innovative by utilizing this concept. Maybe just for our listeners to also to understand that I had the pleasure to work with Bengt and Gregor some 5-6 years ago when Holcim was actually building up this concept, and having seen different frameworks and strategies on innovation and digital transformation, I am also convinced that venture client modeling is maybe not as convinced as Gregor that it's the only one and the best one, but it's certainly one of the top ones which actually delivers tangible results. And before we continue, I just want to make one note. Apparently there was some technical issues, so a few people either couldn't attend or they came in later. Therefore, I will just summarize what have been said so far, just in 3 key takeaways, and then we will move on to the Q&A session. And this part of the presentation will still be available in INSEAD library for people to watch later. It's being recorded. So the main key takeaways that I would remind to everyone, especially for those who joined later, that venture client model offers corporates sort of a unique way to engage with startups and actually becoming their client, and by doing so fostering the innovation without equity investment. And point number 2, I would say a key takeaway is that implementing such a model, it does require buy-in, it does require certain commitment and resources. It's a long-term game, and a specific structure and a framework should be put in place in a corporate. And at the same time, on operational level, it has still to be quite flexible in order to accommodate any operational or maybe cultural challenges and specifics when we talk about global organizations. And last but not least, which already has been mentioned by both Gregor and Bengt, is that although the model is promises to deliver good results, it's implementing it in a proper way that assures you the right results. So it's not just because we are doing it, we will have the great results. So it is possible to get the tangible result, but it just needs to be done, let's say, in a proper or in a correct way. Now let's shift gears and hear from our listeners, because they submitted their questions. As I mentioned before, there are many questions and we only have around 15 minutes to go, so we most probably will not be able to go through all of them, but I try to structure them in such a way that we can go quickly through them. I also structured them in such a way that, in my opinion, that I think the question was placed towards Gregor's topic or towards Bengt, but I might be wrong. So whenever I ask Gregor and Bengt has something to add, or other way around, please feel free to do so. And if the question has already been answered in your presentation, you can just keep it short and give a short answer. So let's go with the first question for Gregor regarding strategic challenges. So considering that you have witnessed several different industries and companies, what are the biggest challenges that established corporations face when integrating the venture client model into the existing innovation strategy?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges, especially here in Europe, is that C-level does not have a thorough understanding of what a startup is. That's a basic problem. You ask Tim Cook of Apple, you ask Satya Nadella, you get a different answer. You ask, how many startups did you meet, correct, over the last quarter, as Satya Nadella, and then you compare that to any CEO of a large European corporation, and I can assure you that the gap is huge. So if you do not know what a startup is as a CEO, everything you do around bringing in resources for change, for competitiveness, for innovation, for whatever you want to do and accomplish with your company, you will not include startups as a resource. You will not put budget on the table to hire specialized people. You will not put budget on the table to work on the mindset of people. You will not engage in a cultural change in communicating that. You will not implement an incentive system to let people know that this is important. This is the biggest thing. Secondly, besides not understanding what really a startup is, or a good startup, actually, I have to stress, right? There's also a severe misunderstanding what to do with a startup, right? Many people misunderstand that, for example, a Google and a Microsoft often use startups not as a supplier of cutting-edge technology, but as a client for them, right? They become the supplier. For example, AWS makes 10% of revenues with startups. The $1 billion investment that Microsoft did in OpenAI basically had a contract behind that obliged OpenAI to purchase cloud services with that 1 billion from exclusively Microsoft, right? So it's a sales strategy. It's not an innovation strategy, right? So that misunderstanding, those two misunderstandings lead to many other misunderstandings. If those wouldn't exist, implementing venture clienting would be significantly easier, because it is easy in the sense that every big corporation is very good at working with multiple external companies. BMW has 100,000 suppliers. I'm sure that Holcim has over 10,000. A big corporation exists because they are able to engage with external companies and do things with external companies that external companies do better, right? So that basic skill exists. Much different from obviously investment in startup, right? That's not a basic skill that exists because a corporate is not a bank, right? And certainly less a venture bank, right? So venture clienting, once you understand, and once that understanding is really on the C level, the organizational implementation, like learning how to drive that vehicle, is actually relatively easy, correct? Obviously, you need to learn something because if not, you're going to crash, right? Those are my 5 cents to that question.
Okay, thank you, Gregor. I will forward the next question to Bengt, which is about the significant obstacles that Holcim faced when first adopting the venture client model, and how were they resolved?
Yeah, I think, I mean, really, if we, as I answered a little bit, or as I showed a little bit on this challenge slide, right? If we start from the beginning, first obstacle is for sure somehow to introduce the process and to bring kind of a key stakeholders, gatekeeper on your side. And I think this is also, while it is a challenge and maybe it is an unpleasant obstacle, it is very important to resolve that, because only this guarantees you afterwards that you have a smooth and somehow efficient process. If you have kind of standard templates on board on confidentiality agreements, on service agreements, if you're entering into pilot projects, you're all of a sudden, you are much more efficiently, and within, let's say, our aim was always within 100 days, you're moving from identifying the right startup or from understanding the problem, finding the right startup to start a pilot project. So within 3 months, somebody comes with a problem and you can start a pilot. And this is only possible if you have that in place and if you have onboarded the people. And secondly is then probably kind of finding the projects, finding the business owners who want to do the first projects. And this is just kind of constant awareness building. I think it's important there, and this is maybe also relating to a question that Oleg actually asked in the chat. It's important that we are really working on business pain points. I mean, if there is somebody having something that keeps him or her awake at night, the likelihood that they would like to try something out with a startup is much higher than if it is on their priority list somewhere at the bottom, obviously. So working on business pain points has helped us a lot to create somehow distraction, the appetite to push the things forward.
Thank you. I will go for another one for Gregor, which is, I think, quite an interesting and important one. It's about measuring the success. How do you measure the success of venture client partnership, and what key metrics should companies focus on to gauge the impact?
Well, the important message here, first of all, is that you can measure success quantitatively and qualitatively, right? In previous models like accelerator or corporate venture capital, ultimately the metric was return on the equity. But whether a startup technology increases startup equity increases value or not, doesn't mean that you're also benefiting strategically from that technology, right? So in venture clienting, you can measure. Now the question is, what do you measure? First, and here also it's important that for every step of the journey, your KPI increase and become more sophisticated. It's kind of like if you start a sport, right? Your first KPI is you want to just run once a week, right? Once you're at the level of running like Bengt, right? Then the number of KPIs you're using will be significantly bigger, right? You'll start measuring your VO2, you start measuring, the miles, and so that it just becomes a much broader, richer set of KPIs. That's very important. So at the very beginning, the most important KPI is, do I achieve that a venture client, that a person in the company agrees to piloting and purchasing and spending that initial 15,000 euros or 20,000 or whatever the number is. That's the first critical KPI, because now it's a company, the engineer, for example, that makes that decision that yes, that startup has something unique that I wouldn't be able to do myself. That's a very first important KPI. A second is the adoption quota. how many of those piloted startups really end up being adopted in the long term? And then as you advance in maturity, two very important KPIs are starting to emerge, which is what's the impact on cost and what's the impact on revenue? So for example, the example of factory automation, if I achieve to automate that process in a factory, how many millions am I saving? And that obviously is the ultimate KPI. On the other hand, if you start implementing a product, a technology into a product, let's imagine that BMW implements a startup technology for a battery that charges in 3 minutes to 1,000-mile range as opposed to in 5 hours, right? To 500 miles. Now, if you implement that technology from the startup, chances are that your sales will increase significantly, right? So to measure that boost in revenue is, and to measure the reduction of cost, meaning the boost in profitability, those are the ultimate metrics that a mature venture client unit should have in its catalog of KPIs.
Thank you, Gregor.
Happy to take that on board again as a reminder, Gregor, that we have to work on that. It's not that easy, right?
It's always complicated. Business cases are always complicated, but I remember very well at BMW when we did this business cases about the next car or about the new feature. You know, how many people are going to buy the massage seat, right? Or how many people are going to pay for the garage door opener, right? So, or how many people are going to pay for that or that, right? And you always do business cases. When you build a new factory, you do business case. When you acquire a large corporation, you do a business case. And business cases is something that big corporates know how to do. They're always a little bit of black magic, but corporates exist because they are probably quite good at predicting what impact will have a certain technology or a certain, purchase of something, right? And so it's difficult, but it can be done. It's a way that corporates are already, led and managed. And now the intellectual challenge is apply what you do for your normal products to a startup product.
Thank you, Bengt and Gregor. I think we have one more question that we can follow up with before we wrap it up. I will maybe ask Bengt a short one. So since venture client modeling is offering this really quick testing and figuring out if it's relevant for Holcim, how do you balance between the quality and the speed? How do you ensure that the integration of the solution meets the requirements of the corporate, as opposed to making it slower the usual way?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, very important is there kind of the assessment at the beginning of the startup. And I think Gregor is constantly talking of leading startups. And I think this is something that nobody should forget. I mean, you will not get a good success working with any startup. So having this proper assessment that you have a startup which has the right management team, which has strong financial investors. This is a thing that I like to remind people always about. If they have the right VC investors on board, this is a signal for you that somebody has done a proper due diligence, that the team has the money to further scale with you, because there's also a question often coming up. I mean, how do we ensure that they can grow with us? If they have the money from the right investors, this is an important criteria. So do the assessment on the startup side. And secondly, don't completely jump all the checks that you do typically internally. So we have a simplified IT security checklist to make sure that we are in line with some GDPR's regulation and stuff like that, that you can early on tick that off, and that also your integration colleagues know then what they have to look at when such a pilot project will be successful.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just one note before we finish it up. I think the topic is quite broad, and there are many very specific nuisances that could occur while you are trying to implement one or the other idea. I think like learning from failures is just a huge question that has been asked. And we will send out a questionnaire asking people for feedback and seeing if they would be interested in a follow-up session where we can go deeper into different aspects of venture client modeling, or if they would be interested in actually different innovation and digital transformation frameworks. So therefore, I would like our listeners to reply to that feedback form that we will be sending out. And since our time is almost up, I would like to thank everyone for your thoughtful questions and for joining us today. A special thank to you, Gregor and Ben, for sharing your insights and expertise. It's been absolute pleasure to learn from you both. And to everyone else, have a nice evening or the rest of the day.